Welcome, everybody, to the War Party Podcast with your host, myself, Chris Warren. It is so nice to be back for episode 2. Thank you for joining us once again. This podcast goes out every week, Monday at 6 a.m. on Spotify, YouTube. I'm going to try to get it on some other platforms. Right now, I'm not very technical. That's all I've gotten my head around. But we have a lot of news to cover today, a lot of military investment updates going on, because I know a lot of you are here for that. But before we get into that, I'd like to acknowledge that if you live in the Northeast like myself, I'm a proud New Englander, we've been hit by the snowpocalypse. It's, oh my God, there's so much snow, what do we do? And I am so disappointed in my fellow Northeasterners, because I don't know if you guys remember, I'm a little older, I'm 31. Back in the day when I was in middle school, we would get like a life-ending snowstorm 4 or 5 times a winter. Like, I lived up in the woods, and there would be entire weeks of the winter you just didn't go outside because they didn't really plow up where we were. Power lines would go down. You'd lose power. Everyone had to have a generator purely to, like, survive. And it was very normal. Like, sometimes because we'd get so many snow days, our school year would get pushed well into June. So this is nothing crazy. But I guess the last couple of years we've had really light winters. We've been lucky in that sense. And so everyone's losing their fucking mind. Like, I went to the grocery store the other day before the snow came in, and not to stock up on supplies, because it's not going to be that big of a deal, but because I needed seltzer, because I am an alcoholic. And I want to be clear, I'm a recovered alcoholic, okay? I haven't had a drink or a drug in almost 4 years. March 1st is my sobriety date, so God willing, we make it to there, and we can cross off 4 years of sobriety. And that being said, if you do have a problem with drugs or alcohol, please get help. I've been there before. I was a crippling alcoholic, and I've turned my life around, and you can too. There are lots of resources. There's NA, there's AA, there's rehab, there's all sorts of other programs, and a lot of people who have gone through addiction issues that are willing to help you, myself included. I'll put this out there. If you truly are struggling with drugs and alcohol, and you need help, you can DM me on Instagram. I don't really respond on TikTok. I'm not on there that much. But if you DM me on Instagram and you have a genuine problem and a sincere interest in getting help and getting better, I am willing to help you. I will do my best to link you with resources in your area and get you in touch with the people that can get you sober. And I want to be clear, I'm not licensed in anything. I'm not associated or affiliated with any organization. This is just one alcoholic addict to another alcoholic addict. I do want you to get better. And just know things can get better and you're not alone. That was kind of a weird way to intro the podcast. I digress. But I went to the grocery store because I need non-alcoholic seltzer. I used to drink a lot of beer, and now I need to drink a lot of seltzer. It's like a mental thing. I go through like 12 a day. I'm constantly peeing. And I go to the grocery store because if I don't have seltzer, I'll relapse. That's where I'm at in life. So I already had a couple cases, but I figured in case I get snowed in for 48 hours, what's another case of seltzer? Let's really turn this into a party. And I go there, and these morons are all in Stop and Shop getting like a month's worth of groceries in their shopping cart. Like, I'm seeing ladies walk around with 2 full grocery carts, like elbowing each other to get pasta and shit. Like, guys, you're gonna be inside for tops 48 hours. Tops 48 hours. You need 6-7 meals tops of food, and you're going to be fine. You probably already have a day's or 2 worth of food at home. You don't need to go get an additional month's supply like we're frontiersmen out on the plains getting ready for the winter. Like, people were prepping like they were doomsday preppers. Like, they were getting ready for the nukes to drop, and they were getting all the food to put in their bunker. And weird shit was missing at the grocery. Like, all the meat was gone, which kind of makes sense, but at the same time, like, if it's that bad that you need a week's worth of, like, chicken and steak, the power's also going to go out. The power's going to go out, and what you're going to, I'll put it outside. I'll put all the meat outside. It's cold. Raccoons are going to gank all your shit. So, great going, moron. And then weirder stuff was, like, all the yogurt was missing. All of the yogurt was missing. Like, people had shopping carts filled with yogurt, I guess, before I got there. Is your biggest concern, like, if I'm trapped inside for a week and it's the apocalypse, I really need my probiotics. I can't be constipated. Like, what? Just people lose their minds. People, if society ever collapses, like, people are like, that'll never happen. We get a snowstorm and the rule of law is already gone. I have no faith in my neighbors to hold out in a nuclear apocalypse. But I digress. I did see one guy doing it right. I was waiting in the self-checkout line for like a half hour, holding my 12-pack of raspberry seltzer. And I see this one disheveled guy in a Jets jersey, and he has a shopping cart, and all that is in it is 3 30 racks of Yingling beer. And I was like, hell yeah, dude. That's how you prep for a storm. That's how I used to prep for a storm. When I was in the full blows of alcoholism a couple of years ago, when a storm or something like that was coming in, and I would never know because I wouldn't check like the weather app. I would just see it's going to snow or get like a text from someone, hey, we're going to be snowed in. I would go and I'd panic and I'd go to the liquor store. I'd get a 30 rack of Yingling myself because that was my favorite beer at the time. I'd get a 30 rack of Yingling beer. I'd get three bottles of Tito's vodka and a sleeve of nips. And then I would also go to the grocery store and get like 2 frozen pizzas just in case I felt like eating. I usually didn't eat most days, but in case I got hungry. And then on the way home, I'd stop at the gas station and get like 4 packs of cigarettes. That was my, I'm going to be snowed in for a week or a couple days prep. And a lot of you were asking, oh, you already got all the beer and vodka. Why'd you need a sleeve of nips? I'd get a sleeve of nips because when I would wake up with a brutal hangover, I could reach over to my nightstand and pop like 2 or 3 nips first thing when I woke up to just even everything out. A little hair of the dog. Or also I'd keep a couple in my bathroom because when I'd be throwing up because I drank too much, I'd be throwing up over the toilet. I'd get like 5 or 6 good heaves in. And then I would be like, whew, okay, that kind of sobered me up. That's a problem. And I'd take another nip, which would instantly make me vomit. And that was my strategy. Also, the best part about that time period was I would convince myself it was okay to smoke cigarettes in my tiny apartment because it was winter. And if I went outside, I would be blackout drunk all the time. And there was a very real possibility that I might pass out on my porch in the snow and freeze to death. So it was actually the most responsible thing I could do to chain smoke cigarettes in my bed, blackout drunk, and just ash on my chest. That's what I would do. So that's just a little example of how life's improved a little bit. You know, we've really turned things around, and again, you can too. But let's get into the news. That was a little personal story for you, a little bit of Chris Warren lore, which some of you have asked for. So I'll share a couple personal stories in these episodes of the podcast, just so we can get to know each other a little better, you know? But the first story I want to talk about is actually a story from a couple weeks ago, the Maduro raid. I did talk about it last week, so we're not going to go over all again. Don't worry. But I do want to talk about, I missed some things. I didn't miss them. I just forgot to talk about them. I made some videos, some short form content on social media, but I want to dig in a little more because we used a sound weapon apparently during the raid on Maduro. Like, there were reports, and granted, these are reports from the Venezuelans, so take it with a grain of salt. I want to believe them because I think it's cool, so I'm going to choose to take it at face value. But people were reporting that we used some sort of sound weapon to, like, blast people with it, and it, like, threw off their equilibrium, and there's reports that, like, people were vomiting or, like, fell to the ground because they got vertigo. There's also some more crazy examples that these ones are a little less verified, but that like people were bleeding from their eyes and ears, and like 1 or 2 guys died because like their brain exploded. Like we were hitting with a sound weapon, blowing up people's brains. That's what the Delta Force was doing. Like the Delta Force literally got the Wunderwaffen. They got the Wunderwaffen from Call of Duty World at War. They hit the mystery box and they lucked out and were just fucking zapping guys with future sound beams. As they were doing the raid on Maduro. And what this probably, and I do think that probably a sound weapon was used. I think the bleeding from the eyes and people's brains exploding is probably an exaggeration, but I do think a lot of people, did get disoriented and vomited and maybe, lost their equilibrium from it. And I think what this is if you're familiar with Project Medusa, which some of you might be, Project Medusa was this program the U.S. government canceled in 2008, publicly at least. But it was DARPA, which for those that don't know, DARPA's hilarious because it's this pseudo kind of secret but public government entity, and they claim they do other things, but all they really do is they build like crazy future weapons. They build like laser rifles from Fallout New Vegas. They build plasma weapons. Like They build Rube Goldberg machines that launch mini nukes. They build like super villains from like a Batman comic book weapons. Like the guys building the laser that's going to blow up the moon, that is DARPA. They are hilarious. They're like the experimental weapons division of the Department of War. They're very cool. They're very interesting. But they had been working on and Medusa, this is public, Project Medusa was their attempt to somehow combine microwaves and sound waves. I'm not an engineer, so forgive me, I don't know the technicals, but they were going to combine microwaves and sound waves to build a sound weapon, like a sound gun, which sounds like what was used in the Maduro raid if these reports are true. And it was, again, canceled in 2008, but I think that means they accomplished their goal and just wanted to keep it a secret. So I think Project Medusa got pulled out on the Venezuelans to grab Maduro. And fun thing about why Project Medusa exists, because this is how a lot of like American top secret like wonder weapons work, is it's kind of linked to Havana syndrome, which for those that don't know, in Cuba, specifically Havana, there'd be a lot of like CIA guys and U.S. special forces out there trying to, overthrow lightly or assassinate Castro and the communist regime in Cuba and like fuck up their relationships with the Soviet Union. This was back during the Cold War where that was top priority. And they would claim that it would get this thing called Havana syndrome, where they would get very disoriented. They would get vertigo. They would vomit. They'd have headaches and feel sick and not be able to think. And there was a lot of theory, both publicly and in the government, that, oh my God, the communists must have a sound weapon. The Soviets, the Russians must have given the Cubans like a futuristic sound weapon. And if they have one, we have to have one too. And that's what started us working on the predecessors to Project Medusa to build our own sound weapon. Now, the funny thing about all this is Havana syndrome, in my estimation, people will argue with me, right? Because there's all sorts of conspiracies about it. A lot of it's classified. A lot of it's debated. I don't think Havana syndrome was real. This is my take. I think that what would happen is if you were a CIA guy, where you really wanted to go was Europe and Asia. That's where we were really fighting the communists. That was like where you sent the A team, the tier 1 guys in the CIA. If you had a future in the CIA, they'd send you to like West Germany to go spy on, what the Germans were doing in East Germany, or they'd send you to Vietnam, or they'd send you, go spy on China through Korea or Japan. That's where you really wanted to get deployed, or even behind enemy lines in the USSR itself, or in communist China itself. So the people that got sent to Cuba were like the B team, for lack of a better word. No hate on them. They were still serving the country. We love the CIA on this channel. Please don't assassinate me. But they would send the B team to Cuba. These were the guys getting Havana syndrome, were the B team. And there are reports that, like, a lot of CIA guys who went there, because they weren't, like, the top-tier company men that were getting sent to Asia and Europe, that they would fuck around in Havana, because it wasn't, like, a high-stress situation. They're like, we already tried to overthrow the Cubans with the Bay of Pigs. We're not going to do that again. We stopped the Russians from putting nukes there with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Like, this is just kind of monitoring the situation. Like, there's not much to really be done here in terms of espionage, because we can't seem to assassinate Castro, even though we've tried, like, 68 times. That's funny. Like, they tried so many ways to kill Castro. None of them worked. They even got the mafia to do it, and that didn't work. So that's a story for a whole another day. We'll talk about that Castro assassination attempts another day. But these guys would go to Cuba and kind of be disappointed they were in Cuba. And Cuba's a beautiful place. And they would just hire prostitutes and get drunk and screw around and party. And then, like, the next day, they would be all sick. And they'd be like, oh, no, I'm not, like, hungover, and I didn't do coke last night. No, it's the Cubans, the communists. They have a sound weapon. I heard a weird sound, and now I'm sick, and it's like I totally mimics a hangover, but, like, I don't know. I don't have a hangover. And as a former alcoholic that made every excuse in the book to not admit to having a hangover because I thought I was getting away with hiding my alcoholism, I know a fellow junkie when I see one. You guys were lying about Havana syndrome. You were all hungover, and their higher-ups covered for them because that's embarrassing. And also, they didn't want their Cuba funding to be pulled. And that went up the chain of command until it got to the top guys in Washington, the CIA, who weren't on the ground, that weren't aware of all the partying going on. And they were like, oh my God, the sound weapon must be real. Put $1 billion into making our own sound weapon. So ironically, the lie about, and again, people will argue with me that Havana Syndrome's real and the Russians or whatever did have a sound weapon. I just don't think that's true. That's my theory. Take it for what you will. I think people were partying and they were excusing their hangovers by claiming the Russians had a secret sound weapon. And that led to us building an actual sound weapon, which sounds like we used on the Maduro raid. And this happens all the time. This happened all the time during the Cold War. Like, at one point, the Russians figured out we had a mole in the USSR. We had like a spy in there who was a double agent. The Russians, say what you want, the KGB was one of the best intelligence services ever. Like, we outclassed the Russians in so much, or I guess the Soviet Union in so much during the Cold War, but like in terms of intelligence, they were really good at that. So they found our mole, and they're like, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. The Americans, anytime they think we're doing something, they will invest in it. Like, that's how America won the space race. We heard the Russians were going to space. We got to beat them to space. We spent way more money, and we beat them to the moon, right? So the Russians know this, and so they go, what if we just fuck with the Americans? And so they started feeding this mole this crazy story about how the Russians had this top secret psychic program to develop weaponized psychics to, like, be precogs and be able to see into the future and predict where America was going to make military movements. These guys were basically trying to make psychers from Warhammer 40K, is the story they fed the American mole. And the American mole, not knowing he had been discovered, thought this was all real and he had cool top secret Soviet information, brought it back to the Americans, and we went, oh my God, the Russians have psychics, dude? They have psychers from Warhammer 40K? They're building, Dune powers over there? Well, we need our own psychic program. And so then we invested like the modern equivalent of billions of dollars into this psychic program that never amounted to anything because psychics aren't fucking real. So we had all these guys we brought in to read tarot cards and try to like see what the object on the other side of the wall was and do astral projecting, and wasted all this fucking money. It never amounted to anything. And that's actually the movie The Men That Stare at Goats with George Clooney. Yeah, okay film. It was fine. If you watch that, that is based off of the American psychic program. And so that's, yeah, so I think the Russians or, communists pulled a lot of fast ones on us that got us to spend money where we shouldn't. And I think in this case, we did it to ourselves with the Havana Syndrome, which led to the Medusa Project, which led to a real sound weapon. So that's pretty cool. I wish we had made psychers. I wish we had made psychers from Warhammer 40K, like a Space Marine librarian being real would be super cool. Just unleash that. And when they invade Taiwan, when the Chinese invade Taiwan, the Ultramarines librarian just comes out and blows up people's heads with psychic electricity. That'd be cool. We might. You never know what the government's hiding. Whatever we know is 20 years behind what they actually have. But yeah, that's what I think happened with the sound weapon. So take that for what you will. The other thing they talked about on the raid of Maduro was people on the ground. And again, these are Venezuelan reports. We're talking about how like the Americans were too accurate and that we were firing way too rapidly for the guns we have to fire. Now, the firing rate is like, I don't think the average Venezuelan knows how fast an M4 shoots. So I'll take that as just like a fog of war. You were stressed. You didn't know what was going on. That one, I'll chalk up to that. In terms of the Americans, they said that Delta Force basically had like aimbot. Like they had hacked CSGO or Call of Duty essentially and were like wall hacking and had aimbot. That's how they were described on the ground, which I think you could attribute to the fact that people underestimate how powerful our special forces are and that Delta Force really is that guy and can do that shit. And it's just how they operate. But a funner take on it could be that, what are they called? I'm blanking. Anduril. I'm mispronouncing. I mispronounce everything on this podcast, so just accept that. Anduril is this company that is not publicly traded yet. When they do their initial public offering for stock, I'm putting like $5,000 on them minimum. I'm buying it. They're going to be they make so much cool stuff. We'll do a whole episode on them one day when we get closer to them having publicly traded stock. But they have this, I covered it before in a short video. They have like a VR headset, almost like Google glasses, that will basically give you like a HUD from Halo in real life. It'll give soldiers like a little mini map on the bottom with like the red dots where the enemies are, and like it'll gauge distances for you and like pin on targets based on like motion and AI. They have like they're developing VR for the military that can be used in, or I guess it's not VR, it's augmented reality, because you're still seeing what's going on. It's just giving you like a bunch of extra information. Again, like we're making Space Marines real. It's like Space Marine helmet. It's fucking sick. I love 40K. But I think if it's not just the fact that Delta Force is that powerful and people underestimated them, it could be that they have early access to those augmented reality headsets and that's what they were using to do that. So that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool part of that. Next, I want to talk about some new news, which is that China has been doing an energy deal with Canada. They've been working on this energy deal and a bunch of other trade deals, and basically Canada is frustrated with America and is trying to pull away from us, being less dependent on us, like many of the European nations are doing, which we talked about last episode. But Canada's now also doing it, especially over the Greenland situation. That was kind of the final straw for them. That led them to look more to China and other allies. So they're doing all these new deals with China. America is understandably furious at this. And I think it's really short-sighted of Canada. I'm going to be real, and I'm biased. You can see I have a huge American flag. I'm a patriot, okay? I love this country. Canada only exists because of us. It's like that scene in Casino in the desert where it's like, you only exist out here because of me. That's, in Canada's case, that is true. And for any Canadians, and I appreciate my Canadian listeners, I don't want to shit on you guys too much, but for anyone that's going to be like, no, we only America, like we can operate without, and actually Canada's got its own economy. No, you fucking don't. Canada operates by leeching off the U.S. economy. Your entire economy is linked to U.S. markets, is linked to U.S. research and U.S. talent. You are so inherently, intrinsically tied to the U.S., and so if you want to like get away from us and go to China, if the U.S. falls for some reason, like more in an economic sense, right? That's going to directly, it's going to cause a cascading effect. That's going to directly affect Canada. You guys aren't going to like weather that storm. You're going to get fucked too. We're too tied together. Like you're not getting away with that. And so this notion that you're going to go to China to get off dependency from us is ridiculous. There's a reason all of your cities are within 50 miles of the border. Because you're basically an extension of America, economically speaking. I'm not talking about anything else. That's a different debate for a different day. So if you go to China and somehow you start making even more deals and you start getting your energy from them and you start getting access to their markets and get their markets coming into you, that's going to be great for a little bit for you. It is. It could be great for a little. You'll get a little independence from the U.S., and that you might see some better deals out of China, quite frankly, just to be honest with you. What's going to happen in the long run is China is going to operate like Walmart. This is a good analogy. China's going to operate like Walmart. They're going to come in to a town, and they're going to undercut all the mom and pop and independent stores and like local small chains and put them out of business because they're going to operate at a loss for a little bit with undercut prices to get rid of all the competition in a region. We've seen Walmart do this state after state, town after town. And then once they're a monopoly, essentially, they will jack the prices back up and you will actually be paying more than you did with us. So you'll get a better deal out of China for about a decade until they have your economy so dependent on them that they will then have a monopoly with you in a lot of industries, and they will then jack up the prices and give you a far worse deal than America ever did. So I think it is short-sighted of Canada to do this. I think it's not long-term a solution because China has showed time and time again that they will do. We talked about this last episode with the way they operate in terms of flexing their soft imperial power. They're kind of like modern colonialism. You know, they did a little differently with natural resources in Venezuela and Angola like we talked about last week. But in terms of Canada, they're going to do it more traditionally, economically, by getting Canada dependent in so many industries on Chinese imports and exports, and then pulling the rug out from under them. And now that you're dependent on us, you're going to pay what we say, and you're going to get a worse deal than you got with America. So that's what I think's going on with Canada. Here's my plan for how we fix this. This is what I think that the CIA should do. CIA, if you're listening, give me a job. I'd be great. I get accused of working for you all the time. I get accused of being a Fed or a CIA plant, or a plant for a foreign government, or a controlled opposition. I got accused of working for Hollywood once, which was very nice because I would think Hollywood could get better production value and a better looking guy. So the fact that you think I'm from Hollywood is kind of a compliment. That's my favorite one. But CIA, here's what you should do. So you have the Québécois, the French Canadians in Quebec. For those that don't know, there's this whole region of Canada called Quebec that has held their French culture and language over from the time when France owned them, which hasn't been there in like 250 years. Like, the French got pushed out of there before America existed, so it's actually been even longer. And they, for whatever reason, have kind of isolated themselves and been able to hold on to the French culture and the French language. Like, I went up there to do a series of shows last summer, which actually was a great time. But, like, I would interact with people that did not speak English. Like, they would speak French to me and look at me and then try to say, like, 3 or 4 broken words in English. Like, I couldn't communicate with them. Like, they take that shit very seriously. And every couple of years, they talk about getting Quebec independence. They want Quebec to be independent. They want French Canada to be its own country. They even have their own, like, political party in the Canadian Parliament, which I forget the name of, but it's basically the Quebec Party. Like, they're a one-issue party of just, like, empowering Quebec and getting Quebec more, like, independence from Canada. And so, because there's already this atmosphere of the Quebecois wanting independence and seeing themselves as inherently different or separate from the mainstream Canadian identity, I think what you do is you put in some agent provocateurs in Quebec, and you get the Quebecois to make their own version of the IRA. I think that would be so sick. If you could get a French version of the IRA in Quebec, that would be awesome. And they're just having, like, standoffs with the Canadian government and, like, assassinating, this is all a bit, by the way, all bit, assassinating Canadian politicians as a joke and blowing up stuff like the IRA did, again, as a joke. I think that'd be so funny to have a French-Canadian kind of equivalent of the IRA. That would be a lot of fun. That would be a good time. You know, and the IRA is an interesting one. I'm going to get shit on this. There's a little bit of a diatribe. I'm going to get shit on this, but, like, I don't think the IRA is that cool. I'm going to be real with you. Like, when you actually, have you ever looked into the history of IRA? By the way, we're on our, like, 3rd iteration of it. It's not even the original IRA, which actually fought a war against Great Britain to get independence right after World War I. That's a cool war. It doesn't really get talked about. Like, the IRA now is kind of like a shadow of its former self. They allegedly, pretty much all they do is do, like, weapons deals. Like, they do gun deals all over the world, and that's kind of like their bread and butter. They're basically a criminal entity at this point in, like, a real sense. But even at their height in, like, you know, the 70s, the 80s, even a little bit in the 90s, when they were, like, fighting the British government to get Northern Ireland during the Troubles, they weren't even that cool back then. They just, like, you know, they blew up a couple stuff. They accidentally killed a bunch of civilians. They did a couple kind of, like, assassinations of low-level politicians and government officials. They got into, like, 2 or 3 actually cool shootouts with the British armed forces and British police. So that was cool. But, like, that's kind of it. I think the only reason, and I'm going to get so much shit because people love the IRA who haven't looked into them. People in America love the IRA, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that, like, especially where I live in New England, there's a ton of Irish. I'm Irish, by the way, if you didn't know that. I wear a little, what side is it on? I wear a little Irish pin. If you're watching the video, that's what that is. That's a little Irish pin from my Irish heritage. And so many people here in America want to make being Irish cool, and as an Irish American myself, I don't get it. Like, I've been to the motherland in Ireland, and nothing against it. It's just like a sad, kind of rainy place. It's fine. Dublin's fine. It's not, you know, there's better places to go on vacation to. But yeah, I think it's a deep need to have being Irish be cool, and, like, the IRA and all the IRA, like, punk rock music scene that goes along with it makes us feel cool. Because when you go to Ireland, they don't give a shit. You don't talk about the IRA over there because they don't care. It's like that's in the past. That hasn't been relevant for them since, like, the 80s and 90s. I'm also biased because I'm gonna be honest, a little more Chris lore for you. I am from an Irish Protestant family, so we were kind of on the wrong side of the Irish Civil War. And for those that don't know, it was kind of like Protestants versus Catholics, with the Protestants supporting the UK and the Catholics supporting the Catholic majority supporting independence from the UK. And so my ancestors were on the wrong side of that war in the 20s because we were Scotch Irish, which for those that don't know is like back in the day, the British government did what they do with a lot of colonies where they were having trouble managing Ireland in like the 1600s. And so they took a bunch of Protestant Scottish people. They were Presbyterians for the most part. They took all these Presbyterian Scottish Protestants and they moved them into Ireland to basically be middlemen, have all like the enforcer jobs in Ireland so that the Irish would hate the Protestant Scotch-Irish more than they even hated the British because the Protestant Scotch-Irish were the ones coming around like collecting taxes, confiscating things, putting down local rebellions, putting people in jail. And that was my proud ancestry. That was I know I'm not popular in the Irish-American community, my family, because of that. And listen, I don't care. I live in America now. That's all in the past. But you know, like my great-grandmother, I never got to meet her. She was the one fresh off the boat from Ireland because her family had fought for the British during, as a proud Scotch-Irish Protestants in Ireland during the Irish Civil War. And they had to flee to America because when the war ended, they were stuck in Cork County, which is all the way in like the far left of Ireland, like deep in Irish Republic territory, surrounded by Catholics. And they're like, hey, we committed like a lot of war crimes during the war. Can we come live in Northern Ireland or like immigrate to the UK? And the British were kind of like, that's kind of a bad look for us. You're on your own. You're Irish now. And so my ancestors immigrated to America to flee that situation. So that's how one branch of the Warren clan got to America. And you'll say Warren's not a very Irish last name, but it's on my mother's side. I'm not going to tell you what my Scotch-Irish heritage last name is because it's associated with some bad stuff over there. As my great-grandmother supposedly always said, we hate the Catholics. They killed my brothers in their sleep. They killed my brothers in their sleep, the papist scum. Can't do a very good Irish accent, but that's what she would say. And my grandfather, who was first-generation American, he insisted that everyone in the family wear orange on St. Patrick's Day because that's what Irish Protestants still do to this day. There's this thing called the Orange Order, and there was the Ulster Defense League, which was kind of like the Protestant version of the IRA. They had like their own Protestant terrorist group to fight the IRA. And so my grandfather insisted that every St. Patrick's Day we wear orange to show the Catholics we're not afraid. And it's like, Grandpa, we live in America. We live in a predominantly Protestant country. I think we're fine. Also, that's all old country shit. I'm not getting involved in we're American now. I'm not dealing with that shit. I'm not carrying the burden of, like, fighting the Irish Protestant, battle. So that's just a little more Chris lore for you. In other news, China is purging its military again. They did a first wave of this earlier this last year in 2025, and now they've done another wave of it, and this time they've captured, found that one of their top generals in China is a bit corrupt. And I think this speaks to a bigger thing, right? Because all politics in China are corrupt. That's how the system works over there. And that's not even me being like a hater on China. That's just like the Chinese themselves will tell you that. That's how it works, right? You get a high position in the Chinese Communist Party, and then you can be a little corrupt, and no one really cares as long as, for lack of a better word, the trains run on time. As long as the Chinese communist system runs correctly and they get the money they need and the projects they want done get done, no one, you want to take a little side action, no one really cares about that. So the fact that now, after having their military be corrupt for decades, they've done a second or maybe it's even a third round of purges, and they're even catching the top brass in it, like generals, are getting purged and arrested. Might even potentially get executed. That, to me, says China's preparing for something, because they didn't care their military was corrupt for a super long time, because clearly they didn't plan on going to war, so who cares? Who cares if the general's corrupt? He's got good PR, he's got good optics, he's a party man. Let him take some side action. He doesn't even really need to do his job, because we're not going to war. And what this tells me is that China might be getting ready for a war. You know what I'm saying? That might be why they're purging out, all the problemed people in the military, all the people that are incompetent that got there from nepotism or who are doing some kind of embezzlement, some side action deals, things like that. They're getting rid of all of them because I think China is getting ready to actually try to invade Taiwan. I don't think they'll do it in the next couple of years, But I think within the next 10 years, they might try to make a push on Taiwan. Again, I could be wrong about that, but they're doing a lot of military drills around Taiwanese water and airspace over the last couple years. A big one was like 2 months ago. They pulled I think it was less. It was like a month ago. They did a huge like faux land invasion of Taiwan, like right there just to show you like, hey, we're getting ready for this, bud. They're also pushing into the South China Sea. They're doing island breaking where they're putting down islands. They're making man-made islands. They're dumping a bunch of concrete and sand in the middle of the ocean, essentially, and then they're planting a Chinese flag on it and saying this is Chinese land, and that extends their water rights, which is important if they want to like find some oil to do offshore drilling or get access to fisheries out there, fishing rights, or if they want to control the flow of trade around there and keep other countries out of Chinese water space. So they've been doing all these steps that this kind of feels like the final move in that preparation to invade Taiwan, to cleanse their military of anyone that might not be a good look or might be problematic or not up to the task of conquering Taiwan. And so I think this is the last phase of that. And I do think in another maybe 10 years, they might make a push to take Taiwan. I hope not. Right? I'm a big proponent of Taiwan. I do think it's the U.S.'s obligation to defend them. Really just to give a middle finger to the Chinese and show Japan, Korea, the Philippines, and all our other Asian allies that we are a man of our word and we're going to defend them. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully we move a lot more military resources to Japan and South Korea and the Philippines and Taiwan to kind of encircle China and get ready to fight them in that front, because I'm tired of wasting resources on the Middle East and all these other side projects in Europe, which all have their utility, if you will, for the American empire. But I think the real place we're going to win the American empire is in Asia, because China is the only real threat to our place as the world hegemony and our world superpower, our empire, if you will. I think China is really the only threat to that, to supplant us, at least right now. And so we should really be focusing on keeping them weak and getting ready to potentially fight them, or ideally putting so much military assets in the region that China doesn't think a fight's worth it. That's the best case scenario, where we just put a bunch of shit out there and the Chinese go, it's not worth it. But we'll see how that progresses. I also think with the corruption in the Chinese government that we're seeing the military get openly purged, it speaks to a bigger issue in China, which is that Xi Jinping, their fearless leader, Winnie the Pooh, as many of you know him. I might get assassinated for saying that, so if I disappear, you know what happened. Xi Jinping has like an iron grip on the Chinese Communist Party. I'm losing my words here. I'm getting too excited. He's an iron grip on it, and he runs that shit. He's like Stalin. He's gotten rid in several purges over the last, however many years. Not just in the military, but in government, he's purged a bunch of people on corruption charges, and it's really been an effort to get rid of anyone that can challenge him. So he's not only gotten rid of all his political enemies, which that makes sense. You want to get rid of the opponents that openly seek to, supplant your power or object to things you're trying to do. That makes sense. But he's also gotten rid of allies that get too popular. Like, even if you are an avid supporter of Xi Jinping's regime and show no sign of disloyalty, if you're a little too well-liked, if you're a little too good at your job, a little too competent, and Xi goes like, hey, this guy could challenge me, let's get rid of him before he's a problem. So he's also gotten rid of all the competent replacements for him. So kind of a best-case scenario for America to defeat China is if Xi dies randomly, right? If he dies randomly, unexpectedly, he hasn't picked an heir, because dictators don't really pick heirs. There's I forget his name, there's like a public guy that's supposedly the heir, but he's clearly very incompetent and is like a yes man kind of figurehead that has no real power. If Xi dies unexpectedly, he'll have no heir. And then in that chaos, there will be all the people that are, not the most competent, because Xi got rid of all the most competent people because he's insecure and paranoid. You'll have all like the B-tier guys that were allowed to stay around now competing for power because there's no clear succession plan. So they'll all compete, and hopefully in that kind of like political, it won't be like a civil war like guns in the streets, but the political maneuvering civil war, the optic civil war they'll have over that as they all try to get power, will hopefully cause enough division and problems for China that America can capitalize on this and push China out of a lot of places all over the globe while they're distracted, or maybe even like weaken China enough that they're no longer a threat if we do some strategic moves in the background. So that's another I got off topic there, but I do just think China's a threat, and that is potentially our best way to stop them from being a problem. Another way you could stop China from being a problem, and this is, again, this part, dude, this is a bit. So everybody calm down. This is a bit. But CIA, if you are listening to this funny bit and you like it, feel free to use it as a bit. In West China, you have this ethnically separate group of people called Uyghurs. You gotta be real careful how you say that one. But the Uyghurs in Uyghurstan are ethnically different than the Han Chinese, and they are Muslims, so they're also culturally different. And they've been getting hardcore oppressed by the Chinese. Like, they're literally in camps. That's not a conspiracy. You can go see the pictures and the videos. They're getting ethnically cleansed because China wants to develop that part of the country and also wants to prevent any sort of descent of the dominant Han Chinese culture, hegemony power going on in the country. And the CIA, I'm just saying, again, as a joke, you have a group of Muslims that are actively being oppressed by China in China itself. And you're telling me that the only place in the world where Muslims being oppressed has not resulted in terrorism is in China? Really? You're telling me not one Uyghur has thought maybe they should make their own version of ICE or Al-Qaeda? I mean, we funded ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We're not going to fund the Uyghurstan version of that? All I'm saying is there's the Three Gorges Dam, again as a bit. There's a Three Gorges Dam, which provides a lot of the energy for China, and it protects a lot of their fertile farmland. And if you just had a couple determined, Uyghurstan separatists with the know-how and maybe some, Western-style bombs, blow up, again as a joke, blow up the Three Gorges Dam, that would kill, 8% of China's population, destroy most of their good fertile farmland, and cut power to 15% of the country. It would take them probably a decade minimum to recover from that. And it's just sitting right there. Just a thought, CIA, maybe do your job every once in a while. Maybe, why do I have to think of this stuff? You guys are the professionals. Come on, I have to come up with the Quebec version of the IRA and the Uyghurstan version of ISIS. Come on, what do I pay my taxes for? All right, or at least cut me in, give me a job. I'm good at this. You can tell, again, as a bit, I'm good at this. Okay, now shifting pace, I'd like to move on to something else. We're going to talk about the military-industrial complex, everyone's favorite thing. And before we get into this section, I just want to remind everyone, I'm a stand-up comedian, okay? I'm a comedian. I do comedy. All of this is a bit. It's comedy, everybody. I'm not a licensed fiduciary. I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. This is a funny comedy bit. What you choose to do with this information is your business and on you however it results. This is comedy. And with that in mind, the Air Force Research Laboratory has announced a bunch of new contracts. They got about $10 billion worth of contracts that are out there in the ether waiting for someone to snatch them up. And I think that the biggest winner of these is going to be General Dynamics. I think General Dynamics does great with research and design and support contracts. That's what a lot of these contracts are for. Obviously, you have the other big dogs, like you have Lockheed Martin, because they're big in the aviation space. I don't think they'll take it. Lockheed Martin, as we discussed last week, is kind of on a decline. I do think they'll start winning contracts again, like I talked about, but I don't think it's going to be this year. I think we're going to have to wait for 2027, maybe even 2028 for them to make a rally, make a comeback. So I don't think they'll get any of these. They might get a small one. You have Northrop and Grumman, the other big one, but they're really focused on the new radar for the stealth bomber. Northrop Grumman makes that. So they're working on this new radar for the stealth bomber that's basically going to make it, it's already a spaceship, but they're basically going to make it a next level spaceship. So I think all their money and resources kind of focused on that. I don't think they'll be taking out any big new support contracts for the Air Force. Again, could be wrong. They might get a small one here and there, but I think they're really focused on the stealth bomber because the stealth bomber has proven to be so crucial to our defense strategy recently. If you remember, a couple months ago, when there was the big bombings of Iran, way back, it was the stealth bomber that did it. And we flew the stealth bomber right in through Chinese airspace and over Iran airspace to do that bombing, to blow up their nuclear sites. And The reason we did that is to show the Chinese, like, hey, we flew in your airspace. Hey, Russia, we flew right next to your airspace. Hey, Iran, we flew into your airspace. And at no point did you detect the stealth bomber before the bomb dropped. That's the thing. That freaked out the Chinese and the Russians because they thought they had all these systems that could secretly detect the stealth bomber, and they couldn't. We flew right into their motherfucking airspace and their sphere of influence, and they didn't detect the stealth bomber, and they found out about the blowing up of Iran's nuclear sites like I did on the news. So I think that has shown the stealth bomber's merits. We're the only ones with a piece of technology like that. No one else even comes fucking close. And so I think we will be heavily investing in that to kind of grow that power gap we have. And the new radar that we're working on for the stealth bomber that's going to make it even better, that's being worked on by Northrop and Grumman. So I think they're going to be really focused on that personally. I think they're going to be a little too distracted with that to go for a lot of these Air Force contracts. Another company I could see winning a lot of these contracts is kind of a dark horse. This is like the long pick because I do think General Dynamics is probably your best bet for these. I will say Leidos, and I'm definitely mispronouncing that, and that's okay, all right? I learned these names through reading them, and once I pronounce them once, that's locked in as how I'm going to pronounce it in the future. I have so many words I've been corrected on. I know the real pronunciation. I will always pronounce them my way. It's Chris Warren English. You got to deal with it. But Leidos doesn't win a lot of contracts for big manufacturing of things, right? They leave those to the big dogs. They do a lot of research and design, and they're really good at support contracts. And that's what a large portion of the Air Force contracts that are up for bid right now are, or support contracts. And I think Leidos could sweep in and underbid some of the big dogs and get some of those ongoing support contracts, modernization contracts. And I think Leidos could potentially be the dark horse in this race, although I do think General Dynamics is probably going to be a safer bet for a lot of this. I think they have a history of doing these research and support contracts, and I think they're going to kind of sweep the board with that. Also in the aviation space, we talked about how Boeing is dominating, which they are. And actually, it's for that reason I don't think Boeing's going to pick up a lot of these new contracts in the coming year, because Boeing has all, as we discussed, they have billions of dollars in contracts that we talked about last week, and I think they're too distracted. All their efforts and kind of resources are focused on that. I don't think they want to overextend themselves, so I think they might pick up one or two of these, but I think they're going to stay mainly with the huge win contracts they got that we talked about last week. And so I don't really think they feel the need to super underbid or get competitive with these. So I do think it's going to be General Dynamics, maybe a couple picked up by Leidos. So hypothetically, again, as a bit, those might be stocks you want to pick up and hold for a couple months to a year or two and see how those play out if and when they win those contracts. So that's what I'd say. You can go to sam.gov, which is the official U.S. website, the U.S. government website for all these defense contracts, because they have to be public knowledge. So you can go on sam.gov, which looks like it's from 2008. They have not updated that website. I don't know what they're doing over there. It kind of scares me that that's what an official government website for something so serious like military contract bidding is. But they put up all the public contracts up there, from small things for like MREs all the way up to like massive Air Force projects, which is what we're talking about today. That's where I pull a lot of these contracts to then go do research on, is I find them on sam.gov. So if you want to do a little bit of that yourself, if you want to role play Chris Warren and go on there, it's got kind of a confusing search engine, but if you work and you figure out all the kind of ins and outs and keywords, you can find a lot of interesting contracts on there, see the generals of what's being disclosed, at least of what they're bidding for, and then, if you can do your own research and try to figure out who might be a good contestant to win those, or you can just follow me and I'll just tell you, because I'm going to do all the research anyway. I've a lot of experience with this, and I'll just let you know who I think's going to win. Am I right all the time? No, but I have, as of 2025, for the year of 2025, I did some math, and I was right on about 85% of my trades, and even the ones I was wrong on, the stocks didn't tank. They just didn't go up the way I thought they were going to go up. So your money just didn't grow, but it didn't shrink. And again, this is all a bit. It's all a comedy bit. But that's going to kind of be it today for long-term investing in the military-industrial complex, because I do want to make on the podcast, at least, we go into these more long-term strategy, because a lot of the short-term trades that you need to buy like the day of, I cover those in my short-form content on Instagram at Chris Warren Comedy, also on TikTok by the same name. So I don't want to give you like information that's a week old because it's kind of useless to you. But these as long-term trades for these Air Force contracts that aren't going to be awarded for a while, you can still get in on the ground floor, get in there early, hold the stock for a couple months till it hits, and then that stock's going to grow. And if I was wrong and the company, General Dynamics doesn't win any of these, which, again, I would be floored if they don't win a majority of these. But if they don't, General Dynamics stock won't crash. It'll just stay the same, and you can sell it for roughly what you bought it for, and you won't really lose any money. So it's kind of no downside. Again, this is a bit. I'm a stand-up comedian. This whole segment was a bit. It's a funny joke. It's a character I'm doing. So it's comedy. I also want to talk briefly about the Board of Peace that Trump is starting. He's starting this board. Initially, it was to kind of work out a peace deal in the Middle East with everything going on over there. But I do think he's trying to grow it into something bigger, and everyone's all mad and refuses to join because, like, his first invites were to Xi Jinping from China, Vladimir Putin from Russia, and fucking, I forget his name, the guy from Belarus who's pretty much like a Russian proxy. He invited all those guys to the Board of Peace to help him figure out the peace deal for the Middle East. And I think this might be a play to try to, like, as Europe's pulling away from America and as NATO's kind of fracturing over the Greenland deal, but there's also been a lot of stuff over the last year that's kind of led to those ties kind of loosening between America and Europe. So it's been coming for a while. I think this might be an attempt by the U.S. government to be like, hey, China, Russia, we could just be in charge. The three of us we could just do whatever the fuck we want. Not even Russia, because they're kind of like showed their uselessness during the Ukraine conflict. And, we kind of kneecapped them on that. So kudos to the CIA for teaching the Russians what for. But the Chinese, it's like, hey, America and China are the two big dogs. We're number one and number two. We're always competing to see who's going to, if we're going to stay number one or you're going to supplant us. What if we just came together and started conquering the world? And great, this is not going to actually work out that way. It's not going to happen. The Chinese and Americans are way too competitive. We have way too much contradictory interest around the world, where if something benefits America, it hurts China and vice versa. So the concept that we're going to come in agreement on some grand geopolitical, economic, military alliance it's just not going to happen. But like fan fiction time, Chris Warren fan fiction, I do think it'd be so funny if Trump and Xi just dapped each other up and were like, yeah, we running this shit. Like at the UN, just announce it. It's like, yeah, America and China are just now the best friends. We're allies. We start doing all those like old school communist posters they used to have, like a Russian guy and like a Chinese guy like building a tractor together and staring into the distance. If we started doing that and America and China just teamed up and just split up areas of influence where we want to just extract all the resources and profits out of the third world and Europe and all these other countries. And because no one could say anything. No one could say, like, we would dominate the planet if China and America teamed up. You would have Super Earth. You would have fucking Super Earth from Helldivers. But that's not going to happen. There's too much contradictory interest and too much like hate and resentment over all these years of being competitive. So that won't happen. I think the Board of Peace is kind of like a PR stunt that didn't really work out the way Trump was hoping for. I don't think it ended up being a good look. I think it ended up pissing people off a lot. That's a whole different thing. I don't really care about that. But I just thought that was interesting. It's kind of irrelevant at the end of the day, but I do wish we could have just like a Chinese-American alliance, because like I hate on the Chinese all the time, but it's because they're the only, as I've said earlier in this podcast, they're the only threat to America being the global undisputed world champion. They're the only real threat to us. But the reason they're the only threat to us is because they know how to play the game. For all China's faults, for all the shit I talk about them, the Chinese are exceptionally competent, especially in geopolitics and maneuvering in that way. And I gotta, don't hate the player, hate the game. I gotta give respect to the Chinese. I do. Listen, I hope you guys lose. I hope we dominate you and destroy your chances at ever coming close to our level of power, and we can somehow knock you back into the Middle Ages to secure another 20, 25 years of American dominance, because America is the country I'm a citizen of. It's the country I love. It's my homeland, and so I want us to be on top selfishly. But I do respect the moves you're doing, China. You know, you are competent, and you're a worthy adversary. It's the thing where you have a rival for so long that you kind of grow to respect each other. And I think the only way we'll really come together is if aliens show up. If aliens show up, America and China might team up. It might be like when Vegeta and Goku have to team up against Frieza. It's like, I know we've been enemies, but I respect you, and we need to team up to fight the real enemy, Frieza, a.k.a. aliens. And I think that would be awesome. I think that'd be awesome if America and China teamed up to fight the aliens. So I kind of hope that happens. That's my little hope. That, you know, what are you gonna do? That's the dream. That's how we get Warhammer 40K. Is the Chinese and the Americans team up and go into space to conquer Mars. That'd be so cool. Make some real space marines. I'd love that. And lastly, I want to talk about what's going on in West Africa, because I don't think most people are aware of this, and it's not exactly a time-sensitive subject, but it is something I want to talk about because I do think it has a ripple effect, like a butterfly effect on a lot of the other things going on around the globe, and will increasingly have that as we move on into the future. So West Africa historically has been France's sphere of influence. They stopped having West Africa as like official colonies a while ago, but for all intents and purposes, these countries in West Africa were French colonies. French was the national language in most of these places. They were inherently reliant on the French economy. All the industry being done was done through French companies that were out there. A lot of their military was outsourced to the French using things like the French Foreign Legion and French Expeditionary Forces. And yeah, so West Africa for a long time has essentially been a colony for the French. You know, they call it an sphere of influence nowadays. Anytime you hear the term in their sphere of influence, those countries are the colony of whatever country you're talking about. Like how Belarus is in the sphere of influence of Russia. They're a colony of Russia. How, our sphere of influence is like Japan and Korea in Asia, and those are colonies essentially. And so, yeah. So West Africa was basically a French colony still. And, a little bit ways back, I think in 2025, or it might have been in late 2024. I'm not good with dates. Forgive me. Don't clown me for getting that wrong. But it was in the last year or two. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Again, you got to be really careful how you pronounce that one. But Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger all had military juntas or military coups. It's funny. We only say junta when it's sub-Saharan Africa, and everywhere else in the world we call it a coup. I don't know why we use different terms. That feels a little weird to me. I think there is technically a difference between them, but I digress. They had military juntas in all three of these places, and military officials took over all three countries. And the first thing these military officials, first of all these military groups were vaguely socialist, and they all immediately nationalized all the natural resources that the French were profiting on. So they nationalized the gold, they nationalized all the other natural resources. It was really the gold, that was the big one. And they kind of confiscated all these French companies' property, and they pushed out the French, and they told the French, get the fuck out of here. And the French, being pussies, were like, oh, okay, sacre bleu, okay. And they left. They left. They didn't even fight back. What are you gave up your entire sphere of influence, the last crumb of your once great empire. You used to be like one of the most powerful countries in the world. Now you can't even hold on to 3 countries in West Africa and they could have sent in the French Foreign Legion. For those that don't know, there's this unit in the French army called the French Foreign Legion. And back in the day, it was developed when France had a proper, massive colonial empire with real colonies. And they made this thing called the French Foreign Legion because the concept was, hey, the French people are tired of us fighting wars in countries they've never heard of. And having French soldiers die. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this thing called the French Foreign Legion, where it's all foreign fighters. So the deal is, and I think it used to be a little different, but it still exists. And the deal now is if you are not a citizen of France, you can be from any country, and they don't care what your background is. They don't care if you have a criminal record, if you've done horrible things. And a lot of times it is criminals fleeing justice in their native countries. As long as you're not wanted by Interpol, as long as you don't have a red notice from Interpol, that's the only background check we do. You can come to France. You have to go in person. There's like 2 forts in France you go to, and you knock on the door, and you say you want to join the French Foreign Legion. You don't have to speak any French. Again, you could be some like dirtbag criminal that escaped from like Estonia or something and fled there, as long as you don't have an Interpol notice. And they will take you in, and you serve 6 years in the French Foreign Legion. And as long as you serve with, distinction, you serve out your time, don't get in trouble, they will then give you a new identity, a French name, the equivalent of like a French social security number and passport and all that, and you will then become a French citizen. So you earn your French citizenship by serving 6 years in the French Foreign Legion. And in the past, they would use them to go like fight in the colonies, and now they use them to fight in their sphere of influence. So they'll go South America. I think it's French Guyana is that little strip above Brazil that France still technically owns. They'll send them in there to stop illegal gold mining operations and like illegal logging operations. The Foreign Legion does a lot of work in there. And over the last couple decades, they've done a lot of work in West Africa doing counterterrorism, taking out kind of Islamic extremists that were moving into the area, putting down local rebellions to keep the puppet, governments that were French puppets in power. And so this would have been the time to use the French Foreign Legion to be like, hey, these socialist military juntas just pushed out our puppet government that we support. They're clearly being backed by China, which we'll get into in a sec. They're clearly, the way they were able to do this is they were given the green light by China. We should go in there with the French Foreign Legion and decimate these guys. And they could have. The French Foreign Legion's insane. They don't get enough credit. Like, the French Foreign Legion is actually a very competent military entity. Like, I know I clown on the Europeans for their military. I will not clown on the French Foreign Legion. And actually, the French themselves are like they're like in the top 5 of most powerful countries in the world. We sleep on them a lot. We're like, oh, the French surrender, and I'm guilty of making those jokes. But like, the French have the French Foreign Legion, which is a supremely competent fighting force that can get shit done, that has a great military record of getting shit done. They have the de Gaulle, which is like Europe's only real aircraft carrier. Like, the British and the Italians have like their little shitty aircraft carriers that they're like, these are real. No, the de Gaulle is the only real aircraft carrier in Western Europe. It's awesome. It's a very impressive ship, I guess. But yeah, so just credit where credit's due to the French. They could have sent in the French Foreign Legion to put down these juntas. It would have been easy. It would have been easy work for the French Foreign Legion. Just a little air support from the Air Force and the French Foreign Legion on the ground. It would have been over in like a month tops. They didn't do it. They pulled out because they're pussies. And so now you have these 3 military juntas that have nationalized all the resources, have pushed out all the French companies, have pushed out all French and therefore all Western influence, because France was really our America's back when we were all closer, because people forget it's only in like the last year or two that Europe's been pulling away from America. Like, historically, we've all been on the same team, whatever we say publicly, like we as Western Europe and America, kind of like the Western powers, like we were all had the same geopolitical goals for the most part. And so the French were like our proxy for America in there. They were running that part of the American empire, West Africa, Northwest Africa. They got pushed out. And so now you have these Chinese-backed juntas running the country. And guess who got all the new contracts to get all the gold and all the other natural resources that they pushed the French out? Chinese companies. Chinese companies came in immediately and were like, did their classic trick. We talked about what they did in Angola, very similar to that. They went, hey guys, I know you've pushed out the French, but you guys don't really have the industrial capability to capitalize on all these resources. Why don't we sign contracts and you give us exclusive rights, and we'll come in and we'll cut you in on the profit, and we'll pull out all the gold and all the other good stuff there. And all those governments went, yeah, sure, that sounds great. And the Chinese came in, and now that's China's sphere of influence. And meanwhile, Russia, through their proxy of the Wagner group, the Russian mercenary group that, kind of weirdly launched like a coup against Putin. Remember with Prigozhin a couple years ago? I can't get off on that tangent. I'll talk about that all day. But the Wagner group has been fighting in Ukraine. They sent a lot of Wagner guys to West Africa, to Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso to secure the rule of these juntas, to bolster their relatively weak militaries with Western mercenaries from Russia, through the Wagner Group, and the Wagner Group has since committed a couple atrocities over there because, of course, there's been rebellions against these military juntas. They weren't elected. They've said, oh, we can't do elections because we have to, like, decolonize the country, so the military just kind of needs to be in charge for a while. Don't worry about it. And understandably, a lot of people had issues with that, a lot of other factions in these countries, and they rebelled. And Wagner Group went in and did a little bit of ethnic cleansing against the different clans and groups that were against the government. They, like, burned villages. They shot a bunch of civilians. They did, to their credit in terms of competence, decimate the local rebellion. Like, they came in there with firepower and, like, went at it hard. So now, because France had to be a pussy, the Chinese are getting all the resources out of those three countries in West Africa, three of the biggest countries in West Africa, and the Russians are securing military dominance over there, and you'll see the Russians will then push to put military bases there, much like America does in our sphere of influence, where we put military bases in other people's countries, and the influence of China and Russia as a bloc will become much stronger in West Africa, and that's really a tragedy for us in the West, and no one really talked about it, and it's going to have reverberations. And so, although it's a little bit of old news, I did want to cover that because I think it's important, and I don't see it talked about enough. And, what are you going to do? Well, guys, that has been The War Party, Episode 2. Thank you so much for coming back for a second week, and if it's your first time here, thank you for watching. My name's Chris Warren. I'm your host. I am a stand-up comedian. You can come see me live and in person. I tour all over the country. You can find my tour dates on Instagram. I tend to post them on my stories. And, when I come to your town, please come buy tickets. Come see me. It's a lot of fun. I did some shows this weekend before the snow. They were a great time. So we will be doing more of these episodes. As always, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, we're only on episode 2, so I want this to be something you guys like and enjoy. I want this to be a good podcast, so please let me know if you have anything, suggestions or things you did or didn't like. Would love to hear that. Very open to feedback. I appreciate you listening, and as always, remember, wherever there's a war, there's also profit.